Well, welcome. Thanks so much for being with us today, this virtual webinar. We're so happy you've joined us, and I'm really excited to talk about this topic, SBTi and AI and decarbonization, and share a bit about how Pulsora supports companies along this decarbonization journey. So today we're going to cover a few different topics. We'll share a bit about what we're seeing in the market today with regards to decarbonization and where organizations are at. We'll talk a bit about SBTi 2.0, the draft that was released earlier this year, and how various AI use cases and technology can help support along that journey. We will also share some really exciting examples of how the Pulsora platform leverages AI along those use cases to support and supercharge that effort that sustainability teams are facing with decarbonization. And finally, we will definitely leave some time for Q&A. So feel free to pop any questions in the chat throughout today's conversation, and we'll have some folks monitoring the chat throughout as well. So you may see a response during today's conversation, and if we can't get to it live at the very end, we'll be sure to follow up as well. So we're really excited to hear what you all have to say on this topic. Just to quickly introduce myself, so my name is Jessica Mathis, and I am a product manager here at Pulsora. I've been working in the sustainability and technology space for the last 8 years, and especially have spent a lot of time in the AI space as well, both on kind of classical AI like machine learning, and now a lot of focus on generative AI. So now that I've introduced myself, I want to share a little bit about Pulsora. So for those who, Pulsora may not be familiar to you, we are a AI first platform, a comprehensive platform that was really built for those use cases all across the sustainability value chain. So all things when you think of reporting, compliance, managing your data collection processes, your carbon management and decarbonization and performance metrics, all of that all in one place in this unified and purpose-built platform. And specifically, I am a product manager and I lead our carbon product. So that's why I'm here with you today and really excited to share a bit more about what we do. And so before we dive a bit into SBTi 2.0, I want to hear a little bit from you. So we're going to launch a quick poll, and we really want to hear a bit about the state of corporate decarbonization in your organization today, and specifically how you're thinking about science-based targets and net zero targets and goals. And while folks have a chance to fill that poll out for a minute, some of the reflections and thoughts of what we've been seeing at Pulsora, a couple of things. One, thousands of organizations across the globe, many of yours included, have submitted net zero targets and goals. And that is really ambitious and really exciting. And not only that challenge kind of grows as you go through and progress in terms of actually reaching those goals, and that driver to submit those goals. And the reason why so many companies around the world we're seeing increasingly sharing these types of goals, even amidst scrutiny for these public goals, is really a fewfold: pressure from key areas. We see pressure from stakeholders like across supply chains. Many of your customers may have new supplier sustainability programs that are increasingly required. Secondly, a lot of interest in competitor net zero goals and that kind of aspect of sustainability. And also there's a lot of consumer pressure today, which I'm sure many of you are thinking about and feeling, and maybe even yourself are contributing to in a really positive way, which is really finding that value in green products and services. Okay, we're going to close the poll, and now we can see a bit more about where your organizations are today, so we can make sure this is as relevant as possible. Awesome. Okay, so we have a good mix. You have some folks who are new to SBTi. That's great. We're going to give some overview content in a second here. Considering a commitment, Especially this time around 2.0 is a good time to be starting that process. And then also we have quite a few folks who also have validated targets. So that's huge congrats. That's a really big process and achievement. So really excited for you for that. I like that there's also some folks who are thinking about what is SBTi. So let's get into that. So you may have heard a bit about SBTi in the news this year. Specifically, SBTi, Science-Based Target Initiative, has been around for a long time, but this year they released a new draft version of the corporate net zero standard. So basically the standard by which companies around the world can think of how they should be setting those targets and goals, both from a near-term and long-term emissions goals perspective. And there's a few different phases to this 2.0 version. And also, just so you know, this is part of a standard operating procedure, so it's normal for these things to be updated over time. The current version is the 1.2 version. And so earlier this year, the draft for 2.0 was released. In a sec, we'll go over some of the major changes for that. And specifically, there was a big public consultation phase. So many of your companies may have contributed to that, whether through working groups or through public survey. And after that was released and that's been closed, we're now kind of in this intermediary period, about to start a phase 2 pilot. So that phase 2 pilot is going to take the initial draft and kind of leverage that with real data, real companies to see how that might work in process. Because really the whole purpose is to make this net zero standard, valuable for you and useful and efficient. So then this final step here, you can see on the right is we don't know when, sometime in 2026, most likely, but that new 2.0 standard will be released. And so it may look very close to what the draft is. It may look somewhat different. But for any of the folks who answered that they have not yet set targets, if you're interested in setting targets with SBTi, the guidance today, because we have this expectation that the 2.0 draft will be finalized in 2026 and in effect in 2027, the recommendation is to just focus on those near-term 2030 targets because the 1.2 version that's currently in effect is going to be phased out by 2030. So just focus on those near-term targets, and for long-term, you can start to think about planning. Obviously, near-term has an impact on your long-term as well, but maybe wait until the final 2.0 to get those long-term ones in place. And throughout this journey, many of you who have already gone through the SBTi process to some extent might be familiar with this, but essentially there's 4 main steps along the journey. So the first one, which maybe many of you are here for today, is to declare an intent. So to share with SBTi, you are interested in setting a goal or target for net zero. And specifically with 2.0, there's this new categorization of A or B. It's essentially based on your industry and your company size, but whether you're like a small business or a very large business in a high emissions industry, you're going to have some different guidelines to follow. And there are also some specific industry standards as well that SBTi has put out for specific sectors like financials and also energy. And after the intent phase, you have about a year to submit targets. And so this is that process that I was saying, congrats for the folks who have validated targets, because this is really, arduous process that many companies today are still using spreadsheets to support. And part of that process is baselining your entire corporate emissions inventory, using primary data wherever possible. Now with 2.0, getting some assurance on that baseline, and then also coming up with those targets. So both near-term and long-term targets. How much do you want to decarbonize? And figuring out that kind of ambitious yet achievable target is a really difficult process, and a lot of data goes into that modeling. And specifically, something that's new about the 2.0 draft is previously you had kind of a joint scope 1 and 2 target. Now they're separated out. So you have a separate scope 1 and a separate scope 2, both near and long-term targets. And for scope 2, you can also have a separate target for your more like market-based emissions as well. So a lot of details there under submit target. Highly recommend going and reading the draft standard or some of the summaries that are available online to get a bit more in the weeds there. But that's essentially the process, submitting targets and all the supporting data regarding validation. And then finally, what I think is perhaps the most exciting thing about the 2.0 draft is reporting on progress. So, there's this sort of new concept of beyond value chain mitigation. So beyond things that are in your immediate value chain, maybe in your industry, there's the opportunity to help support decarbonizing, a mine or some other operation that may not necessarily contribute to your immediate value chain, but support industry as a whole. And that's something that now there's the opportunity through SBTi to get this recognition, this extra recognition for. So that's really exciting. And the other aspect is a climate transition plan. So not only are you, getting your targets validated, but in this new world, or if it's validated as the draft says, you'll have to put together a transition plan, which means to really take the time to be thoughtful about how you're going to reach those goals, not just declaring the goals, but actually making a plan to reach them. And that's perhaps the trickiest part and one of the biggest opportunities for technology and AI to play a role. So before we talk about AI, and I have several different use cases I want to share with you today, I want to share a little bit about what a comprehensive carbon management program like Pulsora can do. So on the Pulsora platform, carbon management product has kind of two main areas of focus or workflows, if you will. So one is just establishing your inventory. So for example, with the SBTi, coming up with your baseline and making sure that you're using and incorporating as much primary data as possible, automatically mapping to the most relevant emissions factors possible based on industry and location, right? So all these steps, collect, measure, and audit, are really, able to be robustly managed on an enterprise grade platform. And there's a ton of efficiencies and kind of just risk mitigation that comes with that versus, using spreadsheets, which is where most companies start, which I think makes sense. You want to make sure you have a sense of all of the things that go into it, and then moving to more of a technology platform focus can really add that additional value and propel you to reach and meet those goals. And then the second aspect here on that same point is, okay, so you have an inventory, you have your emissions, but so what are you going to do with it? So that's where we also want to provide this kind of enabling workflows on Pulsora to help support with reporting, with sharing out with your stakeholders, communicating those intents and those strategic initiatives that you're doing, and also providing analytics dashboards, performance insights to find your hotspots and really make sure that those climate transition plans, for example, are really prioritized on areas that are going to give you the most impact. And finally, also to provide some scenario analysis so that you can play with various, short and long-term plans and kind of portfolios of projects or pathways within those plans and see really how that can contribute to your overall goals. And so we support customers across, like I said earlier, carbon and the rest of the sustainability realm. But within carbon management, these are those two areas that we play. And a lot of customers are using our software to help support against reporting on CDP, PCAF, and others, in addition to science-based targets. So now that we've spoken a bit about the process, what it means to go through that SBTi journey and how a platform can help you, let's talk a bit about AI. So AI is the really exciting hot topic of the day, right? Of the last couple of years. And what I would like to see is how are your sustainability teams using AI today? So we're going to launch another poll to get a sense for where folks are at in that journey. There's a lot of different AI tools and technologies out there, and maybe some of them are ones that your entire company is using, and that your sustainability team has unique use cases on, or maybe some are specific to your team. So really interested to hear a bit about that. And then we'll go a bit into where those key areas are, where we see that AI can play a huge factor. One other thing, while I give a minute for folks to respond to the poll, I'd be remiss not to mention there's a lot of discussion of adverse impacts of AI on, climate, right? So responsible and mindful use of AI is something that's really important to us at Pulsora. And something that's really important to consider as your teams are incorporating AI into your workflows, how to do that in a way that really adds value more than anything, because there's a lot of real concerns about data centers' impacts on energy, water, waste, emissions, and also even just like communities in which they operate. So at Pulsar, when we think about AI, we're trying to be extremely mindful of where that can really add value and not adding AI unnecessarily just because people are talking about it. Okay, let's close the poll and see where folks are today. Awesome. Okay, it sounds like a lot of folks are using public LLMs. It'd be really interesting to hear if those are through your corporate tools or also through personal usage. There's so many of them out there. Exploring and learning, those are really good use cases for AI, like brainstorming can be super helpful for that. And actively scaling AI's core strategy, that's very cool to see. Very exciting. And of course, there's some folks who are also buried in emails and spreadsheets, and that's okay too. And I think that's probably the reality of where a lot of folks are. Okay, so let's get into some AI use cases. So within AI, although talk today is really all about generative and LLMs, but there's also other, classical AI use cases that can really play a role in supporting your decarbonization journey. So here, we want to consider both of those in these 5 key areas. So the first one is anomaly detection. This is like a traditional classical machine learning approach. You're looking for anomalies in a data set, and this can be really useful for many different use cases around decarbonization and emissions management, especially as you're working towards those kinds of limited assurance processes and also uncertainty reports, and also just to support data collection as a whole. The second one is scenario analysis. So using AI to be able to both generate different scenarios, but also manipulate different variables on those scenarios and predict, do some predictive analytics of what could happen in various situations and how to best mitigate that. Really helpful for near and long-term planning as part of your SBTi goals. We also have agentic data collection. So you may have heard a lot about agents. But essentially what I would think of this as is, beyond just, it sounds like many folks on this call are used to sort of the ChatGPT sort of prompt and response experience of interaction with LLMs or with GPTs. With agentic data collection, you can actually leverage a tool, an agent, an AI agent, to be able to think a little bit about a task and then go and perform that task and make some assumptions along the way or collaborate with other agents. So it's kind of getting a little bit closer to that more like helper function or assistant type of AI use case. Then we have forecasting, another kind of classical or traditional machine learning approach, really important when you think about decarbonization. And then finally, data generation. So some folks mentioned in the poll that they're using AI for brainstorming and playing around with ideas. That's a great use of data generation. Another one can also be, crafting a response to a particular question. I'm sure sustainability teams get, inundated with different questionnaires, both internal and external. And AI can be really, really helpful at speeding that process up and making sure that it's leveraging data that it should be looking at, if that makes sense, from the right sources. So the examples that I'm going to share with you now on Pulsora, we have one of them for each of these 5 categories. So we're going to talk a little bit about anomaly detection in terms of assurance and the data collection process. We're going to talk a bit about decarbonization pathways, which is one of our modules available on the carbon product at Pulsora. We'll talk about how agentic data collection can support with supplier engagement and what can happen if you're, trying to collect data, especially from your most material suppliers, but maybe they don't have that data to share, or maybe they don't respond to a questionnaire. Agents can be really helpful to fill in the gaps. The next one is forecasting. So tracking and mitigating any risks along the way for your net zero goals. And finally, let's talk a bit about report narratives and using that with AI. So the first one that we want to discuss is really that anomaly detection one. So here we are in the Pulsora platform, and this is an example of what a task might look like. So in the Pulsora platform, you can send a distributed data request across your entire value chain. It could be to within your organizational hierarchy, like your facilities, or it could be to suppliers or to downstream customers and partners or distributors. And in this example, the user has provided several different electricity utility invoices. They may have uploaded them in bulk or one by one, but we're able to provide some really immediate anomaly detection insights here with them today. So as you can see on the bottom here, we have a couple of these bills that have the warning label against them. It looks like there's a really high spike in amount of energy for this month of September. And for the user who may not understand the context around why this is, shown as an anomaly, we also have this really helpful visual to provide that additional context and make sure that the user can see really easily, oh wow, September is a way magnitude of 200% higher than these other months. And so clearly there's some variance that's happening here, and they're able to kind of identify that anomaly at the point of data entry or data collection before this task is submitted for an approval workflow or mapped to emission factors, and kind of get all the way downstream to contributing to your overall scope 2 emissions number. With anomaly detection, we're kind of going back to the source and making sure we're identifying any issues upfront, supporting the user with fixing them in the moment so we prevent any downstream erroneous data points. The second use case that I want to share with you today is our decarbonization pathways module on Pulsora. So within carbon management, we have this module that's helpful for both setting those targets and also taking action on them. So like we talked about earlier, we want to make sure we're able to operationalize those decarbonization goals given all of the data that's unified and collected under the platform. And here you can see a list of projects that have been generated and using AI, and they're being generated to support the specific goals that this organization has set out. So you can see a couple like solar panel installation or an advanced HVAC system. And the AI is able to generate relevant projects as well as generate the potential reduction amount, which is really critical for a net zero manager who may be managing both a budget and a set of projects and trying to determine which projects to fund, which projects may have some risk associated with them, which projects have a longer duration till they'll realize impact. So this is kind of that main place where all of this data can be managed. And we're using AI to augment, you may already have some low-hanging fruit, some projects already in flight, but it's really a great use case of AI to also generate additional project ideas to make sure that you can action on your net zero goals. The next AI use case here is related to data collection, agentic data collection. So this is a supplier emissions dashboard that we're looking at. And something that I want to point out specifically here is our data quality score related to our supplier emissions details. So something that you may see, embarking on a supplier engagement program, some folks may even, actually set SBTi goals around percent of suppliers that are have set SBTi goals or are engaged on sustainability initiatives. And you may want to reach out to those material suppliers. Material meaning you spend a lot of money with them and they are contributing significantly to your emissions, your GHG emissions. And some suppliers are inundated with requests or may not have the technical capability or domain expertise to really support a full emissions inventory. And so in lieu of requiring that, for any suppliers that are not responsive or don't know how to do this, AI can be really helpful at filling in the gaps. So for example, if we have supplier 6 here, If supplier 6 is not responsive in terms of their emissions, but there is another report that has, is available on the web and has stated that supplier 6 last year had, a certain amount of emissions, then that agent can go web search, can find that publicly available information, can populate it into Pulsora, and then we're keeping track of that here because it has a really high data quality score. So over time, you can see where the agent has intervened, and where you've actually collected primary data, like the 1 score here with supplier 5. And over time, you can keep track of that and try to improve that level of engagement with those suppliers, and also perhaps decarbonize alongside them. So this is a really powerful one. The next AI use case is around forecasting. So we want to make sure that, not only are you setting goals, creating projects to support those goals, but you're actually able to model the way that those goals are going to change over time based on your business as usual or business forecasts, and based on seasonality. So within Pulsora, here, this is a sample analytics dashboard where we have both an emissions and water forecast for a global company, and we're able to actually use different models. In this case, we're using the profit model by Meta that is incorporating seasonality into these impacts on emissions and water usage over time. And finally, I want to talk a bit about the use case for data generation. This may be the one that is most familiar if you are using ChatGPT and you're asking it, hey, write me an email draft about this, or correct this paragraph to give me like a one-line summary. Similarly, embedded in Pulsora without having to leave the platform, if someone is assigned a metric to provide, maybe your colleague is responsible for filling out a narrative portion of your impact statement or of an emissions report or a submission to SBTi, you can use AI, Pulsora AI, to actually draft that narrative response in kind of like a Mad Libs format that is going to make it much easier for that person to start from a draft, much easier than a blank sheet of paper, and be able to fulfill that request quickly and with relevant data. And so that model is also able to provide the contextual information they need if this is, for example, the first time that this user has been assigned this data point. So with that, we've now looked at 5 different examples of AI use cases and ones that are really embedded within Pulsora workflows. But one thing I want to wrap up before we do some Q&A is what sets Pulsora apart. So there's 3 main takeaways that I want you to think about when you're pursuing those SBTi plans and maybe, looking for a platform, looking for an AI solution to help move from spreadsheets and emails to a more robust and future-ready approach. So the first one is centralized data management. So earlier we talked about SBTi 2.0 and how, no one really knows exactly what that final draft is going to look like. And there's also several other, frameworks that you may be reporting against, like CDP or PCAF. And so to be able to collect and manage your data in one central place and flexibly apply those metrics across any number of frameworks without having to duplicate that effort, that is really hugely powerful and something that Pulsora is designed to support, to make sure that all of that data has full data governance. You can trust it, and then you can flexibly apply it across different frameworks. Second one is the transparency, auditability. You saw that example earlier about how we're applying AI in this space as well. But most of our customers are going through internal and external audit now. And so Pulsora has been, from the beginning, built with full end-to-end traceability. So nothing is a black box. You always know how the data has been touched, who's touched it, how and when and why. All of those things are really easy to find directly in the platform. And many of those audit firms actually log on specifically to view the data in a read-only format directly in their customer's environment. So it makes it all a very efficient process that way. And then finally, the AI-powered platform. We have a lot more coming when it comes to AI use cases, and we're excited to continue to release those in very specific and value-added ways to supercharge your journey. So with that, we're going to turn to some questions. Look at the Q&A here. All right. Okay, great. We have several questions already in the chat, so as I start answering them, feel free to pop additional ones in. So the first one I see is, if you already have validated SBTi targets, will you need to revise those for 2.0? So I would say for this, if you have targets that are for 2030, then you will not need to revise them for 2.0. If they're beyond 2030, like your long-term 2050 targets or 2045 targets, you may have to revise them. So I would stay super close on those SBTi updates. And that's something that Pulsora will also continue to provide updates on as well. We're going to continue to monitor. And based on that, second phase, the pilot results, the end of this year and what we see released next year, we'll continue to provide those updates. The next one I'm seeing, different options for getting utility data into the platform. So great question. There's several different ways to integrate data into Pulsora, and we work with many different systems or data lakes. So we have pre-built integrations with several different sources, and that can include things like utility API. You can also include bulk file uploads into your process. So if there's a way to get it out of that utility data provider, or if you have an aggregator already, you can upload those files directly. We also have a invoice scanning that we're really excited about launching very soon. So that's something actually AI powered as well that you can utilize. And the other thing that you can do is, we have as well like SFTP type integration. So if there's a file folder that you want to populate those things, we can securely do that secure file transfer. Okay, so there's a question about using the platform to send data requests across the value chain, not only within your organization, so like to suppliers, for example. Do respondents need special permissions to provide data? And if so, are there limited numbers of users? Great question. So if I'll answer this kind of broadly, and then if there's any follow-up questions, we're happy to chat with you more directly. So yes, we have folks on the platform who are using Pulsora to reach out directly to outside external folks across their value chain. Those folks, if they're responding to a data request, can access the platform totally free. And it is something that we can work with you to set up in terms of how we get those email addresses or the kind of ways that we set up their account. But it's fairly seamless, and we can definitely make sure that they are integrated into your supplier engagement journey. And we'll be actually coming out with some more specific supplier engagement pieces and later this year. So maybe keep an eye out for those. Okay, so there's a question about data security. Great question. So Pulsora has quite a few certifications in terms of SOC 1, SOC 2, and GDPR compliance. And so the platform and actually several of our customers have really high data security requirements that we've had to pass. So we're very confident in the level of data security within our platform. And in terms of any of the AI use cases, we are specifically leveraging models that have a no kind of like training policy. So any data that our customers are sharing through our Copilot or any of the features on the platform are not going to leak or share any of that data publicly in any way or be used for any LLM training. Okay, there's a question about pathways for young high growth companies whose baseline is quite low and absolute reduction isn't feasible. How does Pulsora support companies with targets? So Good question. So even within SBTi, there is no expectation that you'll have 100% absolute reduction. I think there's some understanding now that, there is some role that carbon credits and offsets have to play in this. So that's totally accepted and like part of the plan, right? But I would say if you're a young high growth company and you are a smaller company, you're probably going to fall under that category, the A and B, that is more for, there's a specific designation for you. And it would actually be specific to both your company size and your industry. So SBTi has specific standards that are going to apply to your company profile. And so they may not exactly be the same as a really large company that may have a global footprint that's much larger. And then in terms of your point about growth, definitely something that's important. And that's why those forecasting features and other aspects on Pulsora can really help you to make sure that, you're not setting out targets that are not achievable or not aligned with your business growth. So something that I've also seen really popular and I think a really valuable place to start is an intensity-based metric. So thinking about your emissions intensity per revenue dollar and trying to reduce that over time can sometimes be a good entry point. Okay, I'm also seeing another question about a couple of frameworks. So, one customer is asking, okay, so someone's reporting to CDP and GRI, and they're wondering if they can leverage the data that they're already collecting and managing for CDP and GRI to submit the SBTi information. So for the most part, so the answer is yes, anything that is relevant from those frameworks that you can leverage for SBTi, you don't have to, you can repurpose, you don't have to recollect or remanage that data in any way. So a lot of those, emissions baseline metrics and things like that and goals are going to be easily portable over. Some of the other more specific SBTi requirements you may want to augment to be able to submit for validation. But the great thing is if you're already reporting to CDP and GRI, you are, most of the way there. You have a really strong foundation and a good starting point and can kind of continue to just focus on that gap and then submitting to SBTi. All right, I'm going to answer one other question and then we'll make sure to follow up with any of the ones we can't get to offline. Okay, so there's a question that is related to CBAM, which is also an important regulation that is coming. CBAM is super important, especially to very specific industries and the emissions associated with products in those industries. So Pulsora does not have a product carbon footprint module or an LCA module. That's something that we would collaborate with another provider on, but we would be very much part of that reporting, that EPD process for CBAM and also helping to manage your corporate carbon inventory aspect of it. Okay, that is all we have time for. Thank you guys so much for joining today. I hope this was valuable. We will be sharing some follow-up information via email and also the link to the webinar in case you want to send it to a colleague or someone who wasn't able to join because they're running around in New York this week. But we really value your time and your questions, and we'll follow up with the remaining questions offline. So thank you so much.